What's going on, guys? Basis here. We'll have once a week episodes, just as I said. I don't have enough time here. I still in Poland for like 2 months more. This week we will talk about the tips for playing against Vampire Covenants and playing with Vampire Covenants. I will try to cut the videos a bit less as well. We'll see how this goes. So first of all, I created a thread in the Vampires forum to see what they have to say. I will comment on that, and then at the end of the video I will add something if I think that something is missing. This might be a bit more beginner friendly, but I think that you will find also some tips for more advanced players. So first of all, we have Wasteland Warrior talking about the dogs with champion. Yeah, this is a very nice trick, but this is more from the simple tricks and not the general strategy. So what he's saying here is you have 8 dogs with a champion, and for example your opponent has something like a dragon or a Pegasus Lord or anything like that. You can easily charge the character, issue a challenge. He kills your dog, he gets max overkill, but still he doesn't have enough to crumble you to the end. So basically you chuffed a model like this, because next turn he still has to fight dogs, and for example you can push your whole army to the front just to charge him next turn. So this is a very nice way of zoning those kind of characters. Okay, so what Danrak says is it's hard to close vampires in the corner if you lack fast hard hitters, and I think this is wrong. I've seen games at the last WTC where Undying Dynasties pushed vampires to the corner very fast, and Undying Dynasties usually didn't have fast hard hitters. That's like just few blocks that are not that fast, but are just very, very strong. And I think this is pretty important with vampires, because usually you want to have lots of space when you're playing against vampires. They are not very mobile, so if you close them in the corner, you have a very safe game ahead of you. Because with most of the armies, if anything goes wrong, you can just flee, and you will be safe. And with the armies that cannot flee, it's still good to close vampires in the corner, because it is much harder to set the conga lines good when you are in the corner, and it's much easier to get good overruns. And the vampires' biggest problem usually is that people tend to get good overruns, the units crumble in the wrong turns, and if you crumble in the wrong turn, it can finish very bad for you, because your opponent will have 3 charges in the next turns, and this is just terrible. So you have to pay very much attention to that, and I guess this is the sentiment where Danrak was trying to say. And about healing. Healing is extremely important in the vampires, and managing when your unit breaks, when your unit dies, is the most important thing you can learn with the vampires from the basic tactics. So you have to remember, you have to learn when to heal, how much to heal, if you need to heal the unit more, or if it's good if it stays at the size that it is currently in. Okay, so we have the Gaba Gandalf with the tips for the vampire players, and this is just to use your anvils, because vampires have one of the best anvils in the game, in things like zombies or the ghasts or anything like this. So you have to use your anvils and then countercharge, although this is very, very tricky, because if you, for example, have zombies fighting enemy unit, then for the enemy unit it's very easy to get lots of CR on the zombies. So it's not that easy to countercharge. This is why it's sometimes good to conga line, because if your opponent is fighting against conga line, he cannot do much, he cannot fight much. This is only 20mm base, so 2 or 3 models will be in contact, which is not that much at all. Also, this is the reason why usually taking a banner on zombies is a good idea. And he points out the very interesting thing, that in vampires there is no real shooting. Very often we now see the Shrieking Horror, so this is no longer the case, because Shrieking Horror is very much of a very good shooting unit. But Shrieking Horror has a lot of weaknesses, and it can easily be countered by most of the armies. Also, the fact that he says here that vampires use mainly buff magic, I don't think it's true. Very often you now see the arcane knowledge occultism, or you just see a lot of snipes. So if you are afraid of snipes, then vampires are probably not a good matchup for you. But I think that the sentiment behind all this is that, well, if you don't hurry the vampires, if you don't try to kill them too much, if you are not looking for 20-0 and you just play a slow, decent game, positional game, then the vampires don't have much to say in that. They often have one big block unit that will tear through your army, but if you can control that, then the rest is just formality. Like, you can get some points out of them, but you should definitely focus fire on one unit. You shouldn't split your damage, if it's possible, obviously. But you should focus fire on one unit, because it's much harder for vampires to heal, especially with Necromancer's Tome now, which has a bounce spell aura. It is not advised to try to do damage to several units at once. And the last point of the Gaba Gandalf is that general builds tend to have a bit of scoring issues. Well, it really depends. If you play a more defensive build with like Nosferatu and more magic, yeah, then this is definitely the case. But very often people tend to play a big block of Lamia, or they tend to bring some knights on the side, and then vampires have one of the best scoring, especially if they have the double magical move. So, for example, Lamia or Evocation Master or Unholy Tome. With all those tools, you can easily push for the objectives in the last turns. With the weird conga lines, with the weird healing, you can really try to grab the objectives. So I wouldn't say that the vampires are one of the bad scoring armies. I think they are actually pretty good. The one scenario that is pretty annoying for them, I guess, is the capture the flags, because usually they are chaff, which is zombies or skeletons or anything like this, is also scoring. So it's pretty easy to grab some flags if you are pushing the vampires hard. So this might be an issue, but a good vampire player will be able to defend anyway, and you have to be careful not to lose your own flags in the process. Vamp87 coming in with some good tips. So first of all, what I just said is you can easily reform, score, and chaff using raising. So as you could have seen in one of my previous videos about the random tips, if you conga line reform facing backwards to your target and you start raising, then your new units will go closer to your target, whether it is an objective or chaff. So very good scoring in this manner. No other army can do this, especially because both zombies and skeletons can be raised above limit with most of the spells. Skeletons only with necromancers or Nosferatu. The second point he makes is that you should usually ignore more expensive models and just try to crumble them with the wounds that you deal to the regular unit. It is usually the case, but more often than not, if you totally ignore expensive models in combat, you might end up in a situation where you have only expensive models left, because they usually are very hard hitting. So the things like vampire spawns or vampire knights, they usually can dish out a lot of damage. And if you just kill the skeletons and they can damage you and you are fighting, for example, from the flank, so he has a lot of static combat resolution, then I think it's still hard to do that. So just try not to engage in a way that you will get countered, especially with skeletons, because skeletons are one of the biggest traps when you're playing against vampires, because, well, you see some skeletons, they do nothing, they fight, they basically don't fight back, but they have shields, so they have parry, and when they raise, they have a lot of static combat resolution. So it's not that easy to put wounds on the skeletons. And on the other hand, if he countercharges you with anything sensible, then it's very hard for you to start winning combat. I remember when I had a fight between 4 chosen knights and a bunch of skeletons, and I countered with another bunch of skeletons on the flank, and I started winning combat with just skeletons, because I had so much combat resolution. I had two banners, I had a legion banner, I had 3 ranks, I had a flank, better flank, and it starts wrapping up. And if you are hitting on 4 up, that's not good. That's not good at all. The third one is actually the one that I don't agree with, because he says that it's not worth to dispel the first healing, and I think this is not correct. From the perspective of the vampire player, when my opponent lets in my first arise, then I'm good, because usually I need to get at least 1 arise per turn. So if my opponent lets me have the first arise, it's good, because then I can plan my magic phase much differently. But if he dispels my first arise and, for example, has 2 or 3 dice left, then I have to take into account the worst possible scenarios that he manages to roll pretty high on those dice. So I have to be more conservative with my next few arise spells. So in the end, I have to waste much more resources than I would like. If you don't have any one spell that you need to dispel, like, I don't know, rerolls to wound with lethal strikes when you're playing Bretonia, if you basically cannot allow your opponent to get this through. But if your opponent doesn't have that one very strong spell, then I would definitely recommend to dispel the first arise and then try to fuck with your opponent with dispelling more. And the next one is actually very interesting. This touches the subject of the video that I'm planning to make very soon. So he says that basically you can give your opponent longer charges for the unit where the general is, because your opponent is not that likely to go for those long charges, so like 8 or a 9 on 2 dice. Because first of all, his general is going to get into a risky situation, and second of all, half of his army won't be able to march. And this is a valid point, although you have to remember that there are things like coaches that allow some parts of the army to march within 6 inches of the dark coach. But generally this is true. Vampire players tend to play very conservatively with their general unit, and you definitely can force them to take more risks, and they will most likely not take those. So if you give the vampire a charge on a 9 with no swift strike, then he most likely won't even take it, because he needs his vampire to be moving in other manners to be able to give the general everywhere and to heal the units. So you have to remember also that the fact that unit can march is based on the order in which you move your units. So you can first move one unit, then move your general elsewhere, and then move other unit on the other side of the board. So effectively, this is not only 12 in general, but it can be much more. Okay, some small tips from Taxbus. I think he is right that it's not very good to have lots of soft targets. So things like Varkolax or raids or mounted raids, because all of them are pretty easy to pick with magic or shooting, and they don't heal very easily. Also things like vampire knights are not easy to heal, and on the other hand they are easy to target with things like alchemy. So you have to be careful when picking such units, because then your opponent's magic will most likely destroy you, and then you face matchups like demons or inferno dwarves where they have lots of magical attacks, and this is just getting nasty. So here he says that you need to go very lots of glass cannon threats or not at all, and I don't think that this is right, because with like 1 or 2 you can hide them behind units, and then if you like take, I don't know, max out the suffering, so like probably 2 times 10 raids and some hex raids, then if you face pyromancy you basically lost all those points, because it's very hard to heal them, and then raids are very matchup specific, and in some matchups they are very good, and in some matchups are very bad. So I think taking something like, I don't know, 1 unit of 10 raids, and this is all from the easy to pick points in the army, then that's still very good, because they are small and you can hide them everywhere, and it's not that easy to cast spells on them. But if you have more, then it's much harder to hide them, and if you have to hide a good chunk of your army, then it's very likely that you will get pushed and crushed. And the last one he has is that you shouldn't take upgrades on skeletons. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Most of the times the skeletons with parry are just excellent. The only times that you need something else than parry is when you take the commandment, probably. Because then you have weapon skill 6, so there's no point in having parry, then a little point, let's say. Because then it's cheaper, but still it's then just better to have a fighty unit. Okay, so Fernie has a few good points. Some of them we already made, but let's go through them anyway. So the first one is the tip for beginners. You don't have to pick the highest leadership vampire for your general anymore. You can pick a slimy necromancer in the back. And this is usually very good, because you have to be able to keep your general alive, and losing the general in vampires means a lot. So if you are picking a character that is a front character, then it's very likely that you will at some point lose him, and you have to play much more conservatively, and if he is not very safe, then you risk it all. So for example, I'm not a big fan of the generals on the Courts of Lamia, because then if you face something like double cannons, you can basically lose him turn 1, and if you lose him turn 1, this is basically GG, right? You have no march on your army, you lost like 1400 points, and it's very bad. The second of all, we talked about that the general can move to extend the march bubble, and the third one, yeah, you don't want to have the elite unit stuck in fight with zombies. But I think with skeletons it's again not that bad. If you're fighting from the flank and your elite unit is good enough to be able to deal enough wounds, then sure, go for it. But if you want to have, I don't know, for example, Varkolak charge to the flank of the unit that is fighting skeletons, it's most likely not that good idea, because he won't be able to do enough wounds, and he has only 4 wounds himself, so that's a lot of points invested. And the fourth one is one of the first things we said. So be careful with the turns when your enemies crumble, when your units crumble, because you are in control of when they crumble with your healing spells, with your buffs to the combat. You have to be able to manage that properly, and if you are not able to do that, then you will start losing games, because vampires usually have problems with the big horde units, and if those horde units free themselves in not a very good turn for you, then they will be able to go for some nasty charges, and you won't be able to react in your opponent's turn. So I think this is a very important tip, is that if you in lots of armies, if you fail something, if you do something wrong in your turn, you can correct it in your opponent's turn by some fleas, by some reactions, but with the vampires there's no way. If you screw something in your turn, then you're done for. Then you're usually done for. Vampires are not that beginner friendly army, I think, unless you are playing a very pushy build, but I think it's much better to build vampires a bit more defensively, I guess. Okay, Gabba Gandalf again coming with a good point. Yeah, you don't really have a pool with the vampires. You don't have a way to make your opponent come towards you. And this is what I feared very much when I was playing with vampires, because usually if you are playing against a pushy army, you start a bit more defensively, more conservatively. He starts very aggressively, and now if your opponent pushes you, if your opponent tries to win, I'm usually very happy with the vampires, because this is the kind of game I want to have. This is the kind of place where I can outplay my opponent on moves and such. But what happens if my opponent decides to, well, screw you, I'm going to the other corner? The vampires are not very fast army. They don't have much range traits usually. So if your opponent goes and hides in the other corner after first deploying very aggressively, you won't be able to win big. And I guess this is also a tip for the opponents. If you don't feel like you can crush the vampire player, just go hide in the corner. It's usually hard for the non-very aggressive vampire builds to get you out of your corner. And very few people have that in mind from my observations. Like very often people just tend to push vampires because they want to win, but practically nobody has in mind that you can just hide in the corner and say to the vampire player, screw you, I'm not playing your game. Because coming towards vampires is usually playing their game. Okay, the Hugo Mike is talking about a very interesting point. About whether to play first, deploy first. I would say that unless you have Shrieking Horror in the army, or unless you are playing against the cannons and you have lots of soft targets, you really are in no need to start the game. So you don't need to drop first. You don't need to show your opponent anything. Just wait a bit, deploy the units that are not that important and that you can move easily. So things like Dark Coach, things like bats, things like wolves that can also vanguard, right? The better thing about the vampire deployment is that usually when you start deploying the zombies, skeletons and such, your opponent exactly knows where you will be standing, because you have to keep everything in the bubble. So it's usually like after 2 units you can already guess where the vampire player will be deploying. So very often it's good to deploy, if you have to start deploying units like zombies and skeletons, deploy them more close towards the center, because then you still have a choice or whether to deploy all on the left or all on the right, or if you want to deploy in the center. But if you deploy the unit of zombies on one of the flanks, for example, then it's pretty clear that you will either be on this flank or you will just give up a unit for free. So your opponent can lean towards this flank a bit more. And I would say that usually it's better for the vampire players to go second. Not with all the armies, but I would rather go second. Just because in the first turns usually the vampires don't have much to do, and usually going second is better for the objectives. Nice, vamps in MD. I think there is a problem with attacking the unit instead of the vampire. Because if you attack the unit instead of the vampire, then at the end you might be left with only the vampire, or, well, if the unit is big enough, then you might not be able to kill the unit at all. And if you kill the vampire, then then the vampire player loses a big chunk of his magic and such. So I would say that this is not even a rule of thumb. I think that very often killing the vampire, especially because the on-foot vampires are usually only 4-up armor save, 4-up ward save, it's usually much better. So do I have any tips left? So maybe a bit of a summary. So if you're playing against vampires, first of all, don't be overly aggressive every time. Try to think if you need to be overly aggressive. Sometimes the vampires cannot take the pressure, but you might find that if they can, they will just overwhelm you, and it will be either 20-0 or 0-20. So it's often better just to try to lock them in the corner, get some small points, and maybe win the objective. Second of all, you have to be really careful with their healing abilities. I would rather recommend trying to dispel the first ones, because this just ruins the vampire magic phase. They usually have to heal. This is the base of their game. If they don't heal, then, for example, their unit will crumble faster. So you have to take that into account. Remember that very often vampires have 2 push spells. So this is the same principle as with healing. You should probably try to dispel the first one, because then they have to plan for you being lucky and dispelling the second one with less dice than they use. So for example, if they have 3 dice and you have 2 dice, then you are still likely to dispel their second push spell, especially if this is the bounce spell. Remember that the vampires are not very mobile, and even though the ghouls can have musician now, they still are very slow, and they will most likely play in a bubble. It is very rarely seen that you will have a vampire army playing very wide. And from the perspective of the vampire player, I think that two things that you just have to learn is, first of all, knowing when to heal your units, knowing when to charge into combat, knowing when to add another unit. So keep in check your crumble mechanics. And the second of all is learn to position your congas. Congas are one of the basic strategies for vampires, and they help them immensely. So just try them, position them. I know it looks janky, it seems a bit wonky, but that's what we have. And even though Congas has been nerfed, they are still very, very strong. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one. Cheers!